There are no doors in my new house. When I heard that there are homes in Michigan that you can buy for $3,000, I knew I had to have one. What I found were homes that had been stripped to bare shells and homes with trees growing out of their tops. That's why when I found a place on a decent drive in relatively okay condition, I was thrilled that all the house was missing were the doors. The 4-bedroom, 3-bath house was amazing compared to what I had seen: running water, working electrical, nice hardwood floors, no mold, no rot. Someone must have taken all the doors very recently, even the front and back ones, and nothing else, not even the copper handles and taps. I waited for the real estate agency to send someone out for the official show. I was expecting someone in a real estate-owned graphic-wrapped car and a friendly smile. What I got was the world's filthy van driven by the world's sketchiest, skeeziest, and skinniest driver creaking to a stop right in front of me. A woman rushed up from within and pushed her face against the glass of the van's side windows. It was hard to hear her, but I think she said, "Over there all the time, and they said they lost a man, and Johnny never lost a man because Johnny went to war and brought men back, but they looked and they lost that man. They looked up and down and they couldn't find him, and they knew he was there. But he wasn't because he put doors up, same as Sam." She went into one end. I tried to dismiss this crazy lady with a small wave. "All right, thank you, ma'am. Have a nice day." Doors. Johnny went into the back room to talk to Lori, who went through the kitchen to get to the room. Both lost. And Johnny never lost anyone, the doors. The driver seemed to panic and took off with a screech as a new real estate-owned graphic-wrapped car pulled to a stop with the paperwork and deed to the house. I didn't let one old burnout's bad trip story scare me. The area was cheap enough for me to rent a room for a bit while I arranged for a contractor to come and put the doors on. All of the well-established and more reputable firms in the area wouldn't even stay on the phone as soon as I said my address. One was kind enough to laugh and stay on long enough to ask, "You must be from out of state, hearing about one of those cheap houses, eh?" That's where those kids went missing a while back. Well, 20-year-olds. Everyone sees him go into one of the rooms, nobody sees them leave. Some folks have been trying to move in there for at least the past decade, but most leave not long after. Seen the police there a few times. If I were you, I would unload it to the next sucker and get out. It's cheap for a reason. But that man knew I didn't have it in me to just walk away based on rumors. I hired a group outside of the state to install 16 doors at a premium, including a pantry, closet, and pull doors to the attic. They estimated 2 weeks, the universal standard for all remolding jobs. I got a call from the on-site super, Brand, 2 days later to tell me he and his crew were pulling out and issuing a credit, without legitimate reason. They sounded spooked and only said they refused to go into the back room without legitimate reason. I raced back to the house hoping to catch them still there to ask what was going on. I was happy to see their work truck still here, but the men were not in the house. I decided to check the back room to see what was wrong with it. The back room was the only one near the back door, a strange offshoot that had its bathroom, a washer and dryer, and 2 couches crowded with old rag dolls that the former owners left. The men hadn't installed any doors except for the front and back doors, and ones in the back room. The only thing out of place in the back room, other than the creepy rag dolls, was Brand's cell phone still open with only 4% life left, enough for me to see it had tried to make 350 calls in 2 hours. They recorded 15 minutes of videos broken up into 2 to 3 minute segments. I watched the longest of the videos first. It was a shaky hand camera video that showed my backroom door opening to my hallway, but a little different. The wall lights were in the wrong spot. Brand opened and shut the back room door again to show a completely different room, the upstairs bathroom, before coming to the hallway again. Someone asked something in Spanish and the cameraman answered, "Yeah, the rooms are different each time we shut the door. I'm just getting the video of this. Craziest thing ever." They walked to the front door and a cameraman told a worker to abra la puerta, and one of them opened the door. The video showed the front door opening to the back room. They laughed, shut the front door, and opened it again. It was still in the back room. Bran returned to the back room, opened that door, and saw that it now opened to the guest bedroom. Their laughs were weakened with fear. The video bobbed wildly as they ran to the back door and opened it to find the front room. One of the workers yelled "Ventanas," and the cameraman looked up at the windows. They no longer showed the outside, but other portions of the house. They were breathing hard, nearly hyperventilating, now. They ran through the front door, and into a kitchen, and through the den, all in a line when they shouldn't have been. They finally arrived in the back room, but all of the rag dolls were gone from the couch. The men off-screen gasped and the cameraman murmured, "Oh my God," as the camera was about to point at what they were looking at. The phone died. I looked up from the black screen to see the door to the back room slowly shut on its own. My fingers were able to slip in just in time before the door closed. I swear I could feel the house trying to force the door closed, but I forced more. The front door was also closing on its own by design of malicious intent, I can't say, but it was closing fast. I swear I saw a corner of my bedroom starting to form outside before my foot kicked the door outward to the real world. Now there are no doors in my house. In my new house, there's a door that I'm forbidden to open. I've come to learn that certain feelings come along with purchasing a new house. These feelings can include extreme happiness, giddiness, and excitement as the new homeowner starts to think of all the things that can be done with the home. Perhaps they will think of raising a family or thinking about the prospect of being able to have more people over to host parties, or even just enjoy the luxurious space that they can now call home. They might even feel a bit of pride, as becoming a homeowner is admittedly an accomplishment and a milestone that people yearn to achieve. As a freshman in college, and looking at the house in front of me, I thought none of these things. I cannot exactly think of a word to describe the feeling that looking at the house gave me, except perhaps disorienting. It looked fairly similar to those around it. Small, modest, and maybe a bit run down. However, it wasn't any of these things that made me feel disoriented. No, it was the fact that the house seemed to have a personality. It had qualities that I couldn't quite explain. Nevertheless, a house was a house, and it was all I could afford. It had been my grandfather's, which he left to me when he passed away a few years back. I didn't want to find a roommate to split the cost of an apartment. Instead of taking on multiple jobs to pay for an apartment close to the college I was attending, I decided to move into my grandfather's old house. It was a bit out of the city, but the commute was fine and was much cheaper than the alternative. I had never really visited my grandfather at his house, since he always flew down to us for visits, so I didn't know what to expect. That's how I ended up standing in front of the house, moving boxes still in my car, and standing on the front step, the key clutched in my hand as I stared up at the house in front of me, apprehension and nervousness starting to seep in the longer I looked at it. I don't know what was wrong with me. I was probably being stupid, but the house just had a feeling of dread, of negative emotions around it, like an aura, if you will. You're being stupid. Grandpa didn't have any issues with the house, and neither will you. I told myself. I was immersed in my thoughts, trying to convince myself that I was being utterly ridiculous. Hey! A voice rang out behind me. I was startled, nearly jumping out of my skin as I whipped around to find the source of the voice. I half expected some crazy old man with a cane to warn me the house was haunted, or maybe a crackhead. In Portland, you could never be sure. To my immense relief, however, I saw it was neither of these things. It was a boy who looked to be around my age, standing on the sidewalk. He was tall, a bit taller than me, with messy dark hair and dark blue eyes. Looking at him, I couldn't decide if his hair was dark brown or just black. He looked sheepish as I turned around. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. You just moved in, right? He said, motioning to the house behind me. My heartbeat was still pounding, but I managed to swallow and nod. Oh. Yeah. Well, I just got here. I've yet to move in yet. The boxes are still in my car. I stammered. The boy looked at the car before looking back at me with a small smile. Ah, I see. Well, let me help. It'll go faster, he said, starting to move up the path that led to my house. I was slightly taken aback, but managed to compose myself as he approached. On one hand, I wasn't crazy about the idea of a stranger helping me move into my house, but on the other hand, he seemed harmless, and it was going to take me an eternity to move everything in by myself. That's kind. You don't have to though. Most of the boxes are heavy, I said as I looked at him. I'm sure I can handle it. It's what neighbors are for, right, Duh? He said with another small smile. Confusion crossed briefly across my face as I looked at him. You're my neighbor? I asked, glancing behind me at the neighboring houses to mine. Yep. That one right there, he said, pointing to a house on the right side of mine. It looked a lot more loved and cared for than mine. I turned back to him, slightly more at ease knowing that he was my neighbor and that he didn't look like a crackhead. Ah, gotcha. Well, if you seriously don't mind, I'd appreciate the help, I said, giving him a small smile of my own, something inside of me telling me to trust him. The boy beamed. I unlocked the car and popped the trunk, walking alongside the boy as we walked over. I appreciate this. I'm Ethan, by the way, I said, holding out my hand. Pleasure to meet you, Ethan. I'm Avery. We spent the next little while moving boxes into the house, chatting and making small talk while doing so. Talking to Avery distracted me temporarily from the fact that as soon as I stepped inside the house, the feeling I got when looking at it from the outside was amplified by about 100. It was quite cold, with a sickening sense of unease to match the musty kind of character that the interior had. Trying to shake it off, I focused on unloading the boxes. After the last box had been put in the house, I brushed my hands off my pants and looked around, smiling slightly at Avery, who had put the final box on the kitchen counter. Hey, I can't thank you enough for helping me out, I said, to which Avery gave me a small shrug. It was no problem. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me, he said, returning my smile, before looking around at the house. No one has lived in this house for a while, but it's sturdy and a great house. In need of a few touch-ups, but otherwise really great. Let me know if you need help with anything, he said before looking back at me. I'll keep it in mind. The house isn't haunted or anything, is it? I said, teasing in my voice. I expected Avery to laugh, or even smile, but to my surprise, he looked a bit uncomfortable. Well, that's something I wanted to mention. He started, pushing a hand through his hair. Looking at my expression, he hastily rushed to speak again. It's not haunted. It's just there is one thing you should know. This is an old house and has some pretty weird history, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. At night, you might find a yellow door in different spots in the house. You can't open it under any circumstances. Don't touch it, don't interact with it. I can't tell you why, but please trust that it's in your best interest. Avery said, finally looking up at me. Maybe he was a crackhead after all. A yellow door? That only showed up at night? Please. I might be skeptical when it came to the paranormal and stuff, but this was a whole new level. Maybe this was some sort of hazing that the neighbors did for new homeowners in the area. Okay? If I see one, I'll leave it alone, I said, playing along and giving a small smile. Avery didn't return it, instead, looking relieved. Awesome. Okay. Well, as long as you follow that rule, you should be all set. I have to run to a class, but here's my number in case you need anything, he said, pulling a piece of paper and a pen from his pocket and scribbling down a number before setting it on the counter. I nodded, giving him a tight smile and waving as he left the house. As soon as he was gone, I let out a breath, the creeping feeling of unease coming back as I was left alone in the house. I spent the rest of the day unpacking and making the house feel a bit more like home. The day went by, spent unpacking and debating whether or not to make Avery a contact on my phone. Part of me wanted to, grateful that he helped me move the boxes, but on the other hand, I was a bit annoyed at his take on hazing, talking nonsense about the yellow door. I tried to not think about it. Instead, I called my parents to let them know I was getting settled and started to get myself ready for bed. I made a mental note to replace some of the furniture to make the house a little more up to date as I settled into bed, checking to see what classes I had next week before finally putting my phone down and dozing off. As much as I hated to admit it, the last thing I thought about before drifting off to sleep was what Avery had said about the yellow door. The next few weeks went by without anything exciting happening, although college is a lot harder than people make it out to be. My classes were changing every day, and my schedule was hectic. I was stressed, since to maintain my scholarship, I had to have perfect grades in all of my classes. I tried not to show it, still being socially active and going out, but I was constantly exhausted, and the goddamn house wasn't helping. The house was old, I would give it that, but it was difficult to fall asleep, since every time I tried to, the house decided it was the perfect time to start creaking and making general old house sounds. I didn't think about the yellow door anymore, chalking it up as nonsense, especially since Avery had never mentioned it again. Avery, as it turned out, was actually in a few of my classes, and I saw him regularly. He was fun to be around, and I made quick friends with him, often getting coffee and such together before our morning classes. Far away from my parents, I let myself notice the little things about him. Like how his mouth twisted to the side when he was deciding to laugh about something, or how he tapped his fingers against the surface when he was thinking. Sometimes, he would be waiting on the sidewalk in the mornings, coffee already in hand for me. When we hung out after school, sometimes we would go to my house. He never invited me into his. I had also made a small group of friends with some people in my anomaly class, which counted towards my science credit since it was natural sciences. Two of the people in our group were siblings, Ava and Liam, who had lived in Portland all their lives and showed me the best places to go for coffee and pizza. The necessities. There was also Lucas, who was kind of loud and thought of himself as a great physical comedian, which only involved making loud, absurd comments and flicking rubber bands at people. Despite this, however, he was fun to be around. With being around Avery and my new group of friends, life was more tolerable, and though my workload hadn't decreased, I wasn't as stressed all the time. Unfortunately, this didn't last long. It was a Friday, and after weeks of bugging me, Lucas finally convinced me to throw a party at my house. I had never really thrown one before, but Lucas helped, and by the time we were finished, it wasn't half bad. Lucas got the alcohol since he had a fake ID, and once he brought it all into my house, I realized that I never asked how many people were going to show up. "This is a ton of booze. How many people did you invite?" I asked him, to which he shrugged nonchalantly. "Dunno. A bit, but most of them probably won't show up," he said, his words careless and sure. I was already jittery and nervous about this entire prospect, already having second thoughts. What if the cops showed up? What if the neighbors filed a noise complaint? Would that go on my permanent record? However, when I expressed these thoughts to Lucas, he punched me in the arm and told me to loosen up and live a little. God, this was a bad idea. Lucas went into the kitchen to start setting up some sort of station, and I pulled out my phone to call someone. It only rang twice before they picked up. "Ethan? Hey, Avery. Where are you right now?" I asked, leaning against the wall, trying to sound casual. "I'm going to my last class of the day." "What do you need?" He replied, and I looked around the corner to make sure Lucas was still in the kitchen. "Oh, I don't need anything. I was just calling to ask you a question." I was going to text, but then I decided I would call since that would be better, and so that brings us to now, I said, cutting myself off in the middle of my ramble. God, what was wrong with me? Gotcha. Well, what was the question? Avery replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I tried clearing my throat. Well, I'm sort of throwing a party tonight, and I was wondering if you wanted to come. It starts around 10. I said, leaning my head back against the wall. There was a short pause, which was enough time for me to start to become embarrassed. I mean, only if you want to. You don't have to. I started to stammer, but Avery's voice cut me off. No, sorry. I was just thinking. I'd love to come. See you at 10? He finally said, his voice soft and smiling. At that moment, I was immensely glad he couldn't see the idiot smile that came across my face. 10. Yes. I'll see you later. I replied, deciding to hang up when I was still ahead. A few hours later, people started to arrive. A lot of people. Eventually, I stopped opening the door and just left it unlocked for people to come in. I had been to a few parties in high school, but nothing compared to this. I didn't have a taste for alcohol, but Lucas had started following me around with red cups in his hand, telling me I needed to live a little more. After a while of this, I finally grabbed one from his hand and drained it just to shut him up. Admittedly, this was a pretty bad idea, but it was also coming up on 11, and there was still no sign of Avery. I felt stupid and embarrassed, and not wanting to sort through my feelings right then, I decided to get another drink. More cups kept finding their way into my hands until my vision was starting to get blurry and the room developed a tilt. I had never done anything like this before, and the entire night felt like everything I was doing was an out-of-body experience. I had just put my hands on the counter in the kitchen, ignoring the sticky spills of alcohol and overturned cartons of mixers that I'd have to clean up later. I closed my eyes, trying to get the room to stop spinning, when I felt a hand on my arm. "Ethan?" a soft voice asked. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I turned anyway, being greeted by a tall, dark-haired figure with a sheepish expression. I glanced at the clock. 1:34 a.m. "Hey," I said, leaning against the counter and trying to get my vision to focus. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I got caught up with something that needed to be done. Dealt with. I'm sorry," he said quietly, putting his hands in his pockets. I looked at him for a moment before shaking my head and running a hand over my face. "No, it's no problem. You just needed to take care of whatever you needed to take care of," I said, slurring my last words. At this point, I didn't even care. Avery looked like he was about to say something, but a sudden wave of nausea washed over me, making my eyes widen and for my hand to grip the counter behind me. Avery didn't miss this. He took my arm, quickly leading me to the bathroom, looking relieved to find it was empty. He got me in front of the wide basin sink just in time. He stayed with me for a while, pushing the longer strands of my hair away and keeping a hand on my back. Finally, when there was nothing left in me to throw up, I sank to the floor, leaning my head back against the tile wall next to Avery. I couldn't remember a time when I had felt worse. "You don't have to stay," I mumbled, pushing a shaking hand through my hair. My entire body was shaking, a mixture of just having thrown up what felt like my entire body contents, and the rush of emotions that I'd been ignoring all night. "I know," Avery said softly. Without another word, he moved closer, putting an arm around me and pulling me against his chest. I didn't move away. I was mad at Avery for making me feel stupid, for making me feel like a little kid with an elementary school crush. I wanted to be mad, to let myself stay mad, but the longer we sat like that together, the longer I knew that I couldn't. I wanted him close. I wanted to keep feeling the comfort and protection that being around him made me feel. "Avery?" I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Yeah?" he replied, matching the soft tone that I had. "Please don't go," I said softly. I didn't say anything else, because I didn't need to. The way that his arm tightened around me, the way he moved closer so that we were flush against each other was the only answer I needed to know that he understood. We sat like that for a while, until the room stopped spinning and I finally started to feel more like myself, until I started to become more aware of my surroundings. Aware of Avery's arm around me, aware of the ticking clock above the door, aware of the kneading rush of exhaustion slowly creeping up on me. Sitting there against Avery, I let my eyes close. I let my body relax against his. I was tired of being the one who felt all of these conflicting emotions, tired of being the one to prove himself to others. I was just tired in general. Eventually, I couldn't keep myself awake. 3:34 a.m. Ever since I was a little kid, I always remembered falling asleep, even in weird places like airplanes. As a noise startled me out of sleep, I realized that this was the first time that I hadn't. It took my brain a moment to register where I was. Sitting up, I realized that I was in my room, which meant that someone had taken me up there. Normally I would have been freaking out, but I was oddly calm as my brain tried to walk through the most likely situation. I probably fell asleep on Avery downstairs, and he just brought me up here and made sure everyone cleared out of the house. Sitting up, my mind still felt hazy, and I had the beginnings of a headache, but other than that, I was fine. I glanced at the clock. 3:34 a.m. It was then that I heard the breathing. I didn't have any pets, and it wasn't my breathing. Someone was in my room. My heart started to pick up speed as I sat up a little straighter and looked around, careful to not make any noise. There was a figure lying down beside my bed, on the floor. A tall figure, with dark hair. I let out a sigh of relief. It was just Avery. My mind worked for a second to think of why he was still here when it hit me. I had asked him not to leave, and he had taken that request seriously, along with probably making sure that I didn't suffocate in my sleep or throw up again. He was asleep, with his arm under his head serving as a pillow. I smiled down at him, appreciation and admiration surging through me. I briefly wondered what woke me up, but that thought moved from my mind as I realized suddenly that I was quite thirsty, my throat feeling rough and dry. I silently moved out of bed so as not to disturb Avery, still feeling slightly sick as I made my way out to the hallway. I had just turned around the corner to walk downstairs when a violent bang came from the other end of the hallway, making me jump and turn. My breath seemed to catch in my throat when my eyes landed on the source of the noise. It was a yellow door. My heart hammered in my chest as my eyes were glued to it. Maybe I'm still drunk. Maybe it's a hallucination. I told myself. My feet started to move me towards it without thinking. As I got closer, I could see that it had originally been a bright red door, but looked like someone had painted over it messily with a vibrant yellow paint. All of a sudden, the house felt very cold, very quiet, as if someone had sucked the life out of it. The stillness was disorienting. How could I have never seen this door? That was the only explanation. I must have missed it. I didn't hang around upstairs much. Maybe it was Avery's idea of a prank, a joke, catching me off guard when he had warned me about it when we first met. I was only a few feet away. I placed my hand on the doorknob. What would happen when I opened it? A jump scare? Probably. Just get the joke over with, I told myself. I twisted the doorknob and pushed the door open, bracing myself from some kind of practical scare. None came. Instead, on the other side of the door was a room. A nagging voice told me not to go in, but curiosity had already overpowered logic today. I stepped through. Looking around, I saw that I was back in my room. Confusion washed over me. It wasn't possible. Turning around, I could still see the hallway and my bedroom door. My real bedroom. I turned back to look at the room I was in. I looked at the clock. 3:34 a.m. Suddenly, there was yelling coming from behind me. I whipped around, seeing Avery at the other end of the hallway, running towards me, calling my name, panic in his eyes and voice. A cold, high giggle erupted out of nowhere as the door between us slammed closed. Avery! Avery! I yelled, rushing to the door and rattling the doorknob. It wouldn't open. Ethan! I heard him yell from the other side. I'm coming! I'm coming! He yelled, pounding on the door as panic sized my chest. What the actual fuck was happening? A noise came from behind me, from the other side of the room. I turned around, my heart stopping in my chest. It was a tall, black figure. Its limbs were too long, too thin, a black, smeared face, with a white, painted mouth, perched on the bed. It was grinning. I wanted to scream, but my voice was lodged in my throat. I could hear Avery banging on the door behind me. Suddenly, a voice came out of the thing. It was speaking, but its mouth wasn't moving. Curiosity may have killed the cat. More likely the cat was just unlucky, or else curious to see what death was like, having no cause to go on licking paws, or fathering litter on litter of kittens, predictably. The thing said, moving closer. It cocked its head. "Are you the cat?" it asked. I didn't have a chance to answer before it suddenly came at me, its long limbs reaching for me. Its long, black hand grabbed my ankle, pulling me down. As soon as it touched me, white light blinded my vision and I screamed. Pictures of things were rapidly flicking through my mind, none of which I recognized. A baseball field. A glass window. A blonde. A brunette. A river. A store. Picture after picture flipped through my mind as I could feel the thing dragging me closer, its jaw becoming unhinged, opening wider and wider, too wide to be natural. Behind me, I heard the door finally slam open, like someone had broken it, but I hardly noticed. Yells, followed by a horrible screeching noise, filled the room as I felt hands on me, dragging me away. Gentle hands. Human hands. The pictures finally stopped as black started to fill my vision, and for the second time that night, I let myself fade out of consciousness. Avery and I don't talk much about what happened 5 years ago. We lived in an apartment together downtown, far away from my grandfather's house, although the house was only half of the problem. I asked Avery many questions, most of which he tried to answer, but many others were left to my imagination. Sometimes I have nightmares about that Friday night, but Avery's always there to wake me up, to remind me that I'm safe, that I'm okay. Sometimes late at night, when I went to get water or to go to the bathroom, I saw the yellow door. I never go near it, instead retreating into my room where I could be next to Avery, where I could wait it out until morning. After all, I didn't want to be the cat. Ethan? Theodore? Aiden? Can a new house be haunted? Hi. I'm relatively new to the no-sleep community, and it seems that some of you can provide insights into what we've been experiencing in our house. Now, to start, the house I've been living in is not old. My family and I have been living in it for about 15 years now, but it's built from the ground up. The land was a gift from my grandfather to my mother and her sister. They built their house on this plot of land, like I said, only 15 years ago. But the house is a bit spooky. Mostly it lies quiet, but sometimes it takes you by surprise. Well, my family and I are not surprised anymore, because we're used to it. What I'm curious about now is if you guys think the ghosts of this house are good or not. Since we were kids, this house has been a place for unexplained events. The earliest spooky thing that I can remember is when my sisters and I would play upstairs with the door closed. Someone would knock, then we'd open it to find no one there. No, I don't remember how many knocks it was, but it happened often enough that we learned to expect that there was no one knocking about half the time. The second incident was when we were all upstairs at night. We heard things moving around in our dining room. We have these wooden chairs, not too heavy, but enough so that the wind can't move them. We'd hear plates clanking around, but of course, there would be no one there. Anyone who would go down and check would find things unmoved. Again, this happens often enough so we weren't scared anymore. There are lots of others who might post it if I think there's a need, but here are the last two incidents that had me thinking about our house guest. A couple of months ago, I had to wake up early for a trip to 4 a.m. Now my bedroom door faces the staircase, and when I sleepily got up to turn my alarm off, I happened to glance downstairs. There was a silhouette going downstairs. I didn't think too much of it. I was still groggy, but when I went downstairs, no one was there. Doors locked. Everyone else is asleep in their bed. So what did I do? I lay down on the couch downstairs to sleep some more. It was only later that it sunk in and began to scare me. And just a few minutes ago, my sister called me upstairs to ask what had happened. I was on my computer and listening to music, and I replied that I didn't hear anything. She told me that she heard a loud sound that seemed like something big falling. I told her I was listening to music. She accepted that excuse for not hearing anything, but I checked everything upstairs just in case. Nothing fell. I'm a bit spooked. I don't know anything about the land our house is standing on, but this thing's falling down phenomenon is new. The others aren't. Some neighbors and some visitors say that our house is creepy, but I'm not sure what they're basing it on. Should we worry? We moved into a new house, but something wasn't right. Recently, my girlfriend Audrey and I moved into a new house. This is the story of the following week that led us to where we are now. It was Saturday when we finally made the big move. Having had a late start to the day, as the movers had a previous appointment with ours, it took longer than expected. We didn't end up at our new house until 5 in the afternoon. Our house is surrounded by woods, and the sun had started to dip below the tree line, casting our house into the shadows of the late afternoon light and the hours just before twilight. It's your basic country home, 2 stories with a basement, very square, 6 rooms, 2 bathrooms, a little porch, and set back in the woods on a road far from town. Owing to its age, the basement has hot air vents that blow directly into the first floor, but no direct connection to the second floor. There are grates set into the floor of the second floor rooms, about 10 by 10 inches across, through which the air comes in from the floors below. While bringing a box up to the master bedroom, I noticed you could see straight through them to the floor below you. I could hear footsteps from the movers in the living room. I dropped off the box I was carrying and headed back downstairs. Arriving in the kitchen, I noticed the movers were already back outside getting the next box. I headed to the front door, and as I opened it, the movers were just heading back in with new boxes. They must be hustling to have just been in the living room and already be coming back with more boxes. I headed out to the truck to grab another box. I just wanted to get everything unloaded so we could have time for dinner and a shower before bed. Audrey was standing in the yard where the sidewalk met the driveway, directing the movers on where all the boxes and furniture went. I shot her a smile and a pompous flex of my muscles before grabbing another box, to which she laughed. "Where's this one go, hun?" I asked. "Second bedroom," she shouted back, and I headed into the house, up the stairs, and into the second bedroom. As I entered, one of the movers finished dropping off a box and headed out the door past me and down the stairs. I dropped off my box and passed by another floor grate. I could hear the mover stomping down the stairs, then his footsteps echoed up through the grate as he seemed to be walking towards the back of the house. I thought that was a bit weird, and headed downstairs and turned right toward the spare room where I heard him heading, but no one was there. I assumed there must be something weird in the way the sound echoes through the house. After another 40 minutes, the truck was empty and the movers left. Audrey and I stood outside in the dying light of the sun and admired our new home. Mentally and physically exhausted, We weren't overjoyed to go back inside and face the mess that awaited us. We threw some frozen dinners in the microwave, sat down on the plastic-wrapped couch, and ate in quiet contentment, just happy to finally be done. Can you believe it? We finally have our own home. I smiled at her. It still doesn't seem real, like the realtor is going to walk through the door and tell us the mortgage company made a mistake and is canceling our loan. She replied, "Oh, they won't find the mistake. I made sure it was very well hidden." I joked. She smiled and poked at the last of her mac and cheese. "We really should get the bed set up before we're both too tired," I told her. "Right." She agreed, and we tossed our dinner platters in the trash and headed upstairs. I pulled out all the pieces of the bed and we started lining them up where they would go, then got all the screws ready. Audrey grabbed the drill from the next room and I started screwing the pieces back together while she held them in place for me. As I was lining up a screw on the left side, it slipped out of my fingers and bounced along the floor, falling through the grate. Son of a bitch. I swore softly. "Did you see where it went?" Audrey asked me. "Yeah, it fell in the vent. It should be in the living room. Hold on, I'll go grab it." I groaned as I stood, then headed downstairs and into the living room. I looked around on the floor just below the vent, but the screw was nowhere in sight. Looking up at the grate, I wondered if the screw hadn't fallen all the way through, but had landed on something inside the vent. "Hey, hun, come back up. We have extras." I heard Audrey yell from the stairs. Maybe it's just me, but I get weirdly annoyed when I can't find something I'm looking for, even if I don't need it. It bothered me that I couldn't find the screw on a bare, hardwood floor. There were only boxes around the perimeter of the room. It had nowhere to go. I sighed and headed back up to finish making the bed. Once we finished, we showered and were more excited to get cozy in bed and sleep than I'd ever felt before. I got my pajamas on and walked over to the bed, then groaned. "What's wrong?" Audrey asked. I left the light on downstairs. I could see the light from the living room through the vent on the floor. Begrudgingly, I headed downstairs and into the living room, only to find a completely dark room. "What the heck?" I whispered. I looked up through the vent and could see the light of the bedroom through it. I walked around the house, checking all the rooms downstairs, but all the lights were out. I wondered if I was just seeing things because I was so tired. With lingering uncertainty, I headed back upstairs to the bedroom. I must have looked confused because Audrey asked, "What's up?" "Oh, nothing. I must have been mistaken because the lights are all off downstairs." I looked at the vent and it was completely dark now. I crawled into bed and fell asleep with little effort. The next 3 days passed by uneventfully. Our new home was amazing and we were very happy, albeit exhausted, as we opened boxes, unpacked, sorted through our belongings, moved furniture around, installed appliances, and all the other troubles that come with moving into a new house. The third night, Audrey woke me up with a hand on my shoulder. "What's up?" I asked in a groggy voice. I think I heard something or someone moving around downstairs. She replied, her voice a shaking whisper. I sat up and listened quietly. There was silence. And then, a sound like swishing clothes came up from the vent, like someone walking around quietly. "Fuck," I hissed. I wondered if maybe the former homeowner got drunk and came home to the wrong place. I grabbed the extra shower curtain rod from the closet and headed toward the bedroom door. "Should we call the cops?" Audrey asked. I raised one finger to my lips, opened the door, and tiptoed out onto the stairs. It was pitch black down. If anyone was down there, they would have to have a flashlight, unless they're seriously rigged up with night vision. I grabbed the hand railing, as I still wasn't used to the stairs, and started slowly walking down as quietly as I could, but the old steps groaned with each footfall. My heart started beating faster in my chest, and I could feel a cold sweat on my neck as I descended into the blackness of the first floor, completely blind. I reached the landing and turned right into the spare room. I could switch on the light to look, but then I'm also vulnerable to being seen. What should I do? I stopped and listened quietly, trying not to breathe. There was no sound other than the thunder of blood pulsing in my ears. I reached my hand out into the darkness of the room and flipped the light switch. In the room were nothing but boxes, so many that they covered all the windows. I stepped inside and turned to face the door, the curtain rod in front of me, and started walking towards the darkness of the hall, still listening intently. As I walked into the hallway, I flipped the light switch and continued toward the kitchen. The room ahead held a slight natural glow from the moonlight outside, and I could see the blue luminescence of the windows. I kept expecting to see a shadow pass in front of me as I slowly stepped down the hall. Reaching the kitchen, I flipped on that light, then turned left toward the living room and walked forward. Is someone here? The cops are on their way. You're making a big mistake. I have a gun, I shouted. I stood just before the doorway from the kitchen into the living room and peered into the darkness. The room ran far to the left of the light radiating in from the kitchen, and I wouldn't be able to see all of it without sticking my head in and turning on the light. Announce yourself, or I'm shooting when I come in there. I yelled into the living room, then waited, listening in silence. Nothing. I stepped into the doorway, my heart racing. I was waiting to be attacked, shot, stabbed. My body braced in expectation of sudden pain. My hand reached out into the darkness and found the light switch, then flipped it on. The living room was aglow and empty, save for boxes, some tables, and the couch. I proceeded to walk the whole room, checking every corner and behind the boxes. Only the basement was left. I headed to the top of the basement and stood outside the door. Looking at the curtain rod, I realized I had a better option, then walked back into the living room and threw it on the couch, grabbing the fire poker from next to the fireplace before heading back to the basement door. Throwing the door open, I shouted, "If you're down there, it's ass-whooping time." I knew I sounded like an idiot. I am incapable of sounding threatening, but it was more for me than them. There was no light switch at the top of the stairs, and the stairs that descended into the basement were open in the back. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and stepped down onto the first step. The wood shifted and creaked beneath my foot. And another step, followed by a third. With each step, I waited, expecting to feel a cold hand wrap around my bare ankle and pull, sending me tumbling down the stairs. But no hand came. I took another step, and another, until I reached the string for the light bulb and pulled. The warm, yellow light from the single bulb dimly lit the square room. The washer and dryer sat in the corner beside the oil tanks, and the hatchway was still locked. There was no one. I headed back upstairs, leaving the basement light on and locking the door behind me. I checked the locks on the front and back doors, and both were secure, then all the windows, which were also locked before heading back up to the bedroom. Nothing there. I sighed and sat on the side of the bed, placing the fire poker against the dresser. Nothing? But you heard it, right? She asked me. Maybe it's just the house. It's new, we don't know what kinds of noises it makes. I reasoned. But it sounded so much like a person walking, you could hear their clothes moving. She argued. I know, I heard it too, but I promise, there's nothing. Do you want to go look with me? I asked. No, she replied. I got up and locked the bedroom door. Better? I asked. A little. Maybe we should get an alarm or something? She suggested. We can look into it, but I think we're okay. Let's get some sleep. It took me a long time to calm down and fall asleep, but I was very happy to see the morning light. Audrey left to run some errands, and I decided to do a little investigation while she was gone to assuage my fears. I grabbed the fire poker and headed to the attic door. I knew there wasn't, reasonably, a way in and out of the attic from downstairs, so the person hiding in the walls thing was highly unlikely, but it didn't hurt to check. Standing under the attic, I pulled on the string, lowering the stairs. I looked up at the hatchway above me and took a deep breath, my flashlight in one hand, fire poker in the other. I was ready. I stepped on the ladder and used the fire poker to push the door open, then started climbing, using my flashlight hand for balance while holding the fire poker at the ready. I poked my head up into the attic and shone the flashlight in. The beam was caught in a heavy cloud of dust, but lit up the long, dark attic. At both ends, a little light filtered in through the vents, but not enough to reveal all the corners of the shadowed room. I scanned the walls with the flashlight, sweeping from left to right, until I finally had to commit to coming fully into the attic to check the opposite side of the room which the hatch blinded me to. I stepped up into the attic and quickly turned, flashing the light across the opposite end of the attic, but saw nothing. I breathed a sigh of relief, confirming there was nothing there. I left the attic, closed the hatch, and headed down the ladder, then pushed it back into the ceiling. That night I headed up into the bedroom to find Audrey in a state of undress, lying in bed, looking very inviting. "We haven't broken into the new house yet," she said in a lascivious tone. "You're right, we haven't. Would you like to?" I replied with innuendo. "I would love to." She beckoned me over. I walked towards the bed slowly, performing an awkward, faux sensual dance as I got closer. She laughed at my silly attempt to be sexy. "There's no neighbors to hear us scream," I joked. "No, there isn't." She smiled and crawled to the edge of the bed on her knees. I don't know what compelled me, but I looked down at the vent as I walked by and froze. "What's wrong?" Audrey asked. She must have seen it on my face because I felt like it had drained of blood. I grabbed the fire poker and ran to the stairs. "What did you see? Is someone here?" She screamed after me, but I was already thundering down into the living room. I turned on lights as I went until I ran into the living room, the fire poker out in front of me like a rapier. "Where are you? When I find you, I will fucking kill you." I screamed into the empty room, spinning around. It was either get mad or be crippled by fear, and I chose anger. But there was nothing here to release that anger on. "Hun, are you okay?" I heard Audrey calling from the stairs. "Yes, I'm okay," I yelled back up. I thought, "That's weird, I should hear her from the vent." I looked up at the vent. The light in the bedroom was off. But I was just there, the light was on, and there's no reason Audrey would have turned them off. I headed back to the stairs and looked up to see Audrey standing at the top, looking terrified, the light from the bedroom to her back. "There's something wrong with this house, babe," I called up to her. "What do you mean?" she asked. I could tell she was on the verge of tears. "I saw someone through the vent." There was someone in the living room standing right under the vent. But then, they were just gone. And from downstairs, the light in the bedroom is off. I explained. What does that even mean?" She stammered, tears on her cheeks. I don't know," I replied. I stormed up into the bedroom, ripped open the drawer to the dresser, and started putting on clothes. "What are you doing?" Audrey asked. "Get dressed. We're going to stay in a hotel until I can figure this out," I told her. "We can't afford to just run away to a hotel." She argued through tears. "Just for a night or two, I need to get away from this and think, please. I promise we will come back, but I just need time." She went to her dresser and got some clothes, and we headed down to the car, left with nothing but our phones and wallets, and found a hotel to stay in that night. The next day, we decided to come home during the daytime and check on the house. For some reason, I expected to find the house in disarray, as if some stranger had gone through and destroyed everything, but it was exactly as we left it, all the lights still on. Slowly, I headed upstairs into the bedroom. "I need you to do something. Go down into the living room, stand under the vent, and call me," I told her. Audrey walked downstairs, and a few seconds later, my phone rang. I picked it up and put it to my ear. "Okay, now just look up at the vent and wait a minute," I instructed her, then slowly lowered a shoelace through the holes in the vent until it came through the other side. "Do you see the shoelace?" I asked. "What shoelace?" she asked. Something inside me was breaking. I didn't know what it was. "Can you walk around and see if there are any other vents in the ceiling, one with a shoelace hanging through it? It should be at least 8 inches down," I explained as calmly as I could. She began walking. I could hear her breathing heavily into the phone as she walked around downstairs looking. No other vents in the living room," she told me. "Are you sure? I haven't seen you through the vent. You should be right under me. Am I confused? Is this leading to another room?" I asked. "I don't think so," she replied, walking into the kitchen, then the spare room. "Is there a room we don't know about?" I asked her. "Where?" "The wall between rooms is barely a foot thick. There's no place to hide a whole-ass room," she answered. "Well, how else do you explain that I'm looking straight down through the vent and I haven't seen you, but I've seen other people?" I yelled, more angrily than I intended. I don't know. She was sobbing now. I should have been comforting her, but I couldn't. I didn't have the emotional fortitude right now. I walked into the second bedroom and grabbed the electric drill off the dresser, then came back to the master. "What are you doing?" Audrey asked on the phone. "I need to try something." I'm hanging up. I ended the call, put the phone in my pocket, and put the drill to the first screw on the metal grate and backed it out. Then the next screw. A third, and finally the last. I lifted the grate off the floor, revealing the second one that was attached to the ceiling below. I lowered my face to the hole to look closer. As my face got closer, I could see the hardwood floor in the room below, and a single screw sitting in the middle of it. I couldn't get to the screws on the other side from here. I needed to see more. I grabbed the fire poker and started slamming it into the grate until it ripped out of the ceiling and plummeted onto the floor below with a loud crash. "Audrey!" I shouted into the hole. "Can you hear me? Is that you, hon?" I heard her yell from the doorway behind me. "Go into the living room and yell." I called out to her. I heard her footsteps heading into the living room, but I couldn't see her below me. She started to yell, "Can you hear me?" I could hear her voice from the doorway behind me, but not from the hole in the floor. I grabbed my phone and switched it to video, then slowly lowered it down into the room below me and rotated it in a circle while recording, then lifted it back up. I flipped it over and hit play, and watched as the phone circled a room that looked mostly like our living room, but I couldn't see much as I had just lowered it an inch or two past the hole. I took a deep breath, sank into the hole up to my shoulder, hit record, and began rotating the phone back and forth inside the hole. I sat back up, but as I did, my phone caught on the edge of the ceiling and fell from my shaking hand to the floor below. "Fuck!" I screamed. "Are you all right?" Audrey called up the stairs. "Yeah, can you come here?" I called out to her. Audrey's footsteps ascended the stairs behind me. "I need your phone. I accidentally dropped mine," I explained. She approached slowly, and seeing me next to the open hole in the floor seemed to fill her with dread. "I was just down there. If you had dropped it, if you had opened the vent, I should have seen." She whimpered. "Please, can I just see your phone?" I repeated my request. "I don't like this. I don't like this. Maybe we shouldn't." She stammered. "It's fine. I just need to see your phone," I repeated. "We should just cover it up. Just put a big board over it and forget all about it. We can put in a new vent." She argued. "Audrey, please, I just want to see your phone so I can see if this is some kind of hidden room," I explained. "Look. It has fucking daylight. It has windows. If it was hidden, we would have seen it from outside. It's not a fucking hidden room. This isn't right. We shouldn't be fucking around with it." Her face was red with tears now. "Audrey, please, I stopped when I heard it. She heard it too. Footsteps. Coming from the vent. There's someone there," Audrey whispered through tears. "Shoo." I hushed her shortly. The footsteps continued to grow louder. "We should close it," she whispered. "Yeah." I agreed and grabbed the grate and started lining up the screw holes. The footsteps were slow but growing louder. Shit, where did I put them? I looked around the floor, stood, and checked on the nearby dressers and tables. "It's getting closer," she yelled. "I know, I have to find the fucking screws," I shouted. Then I patted my pocket and felt the outline of a few small objects, then stuck my hand inside to find the screws. I grabbed the drill, lined up the first hole, and started drilling the screw in. "Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit," I repeated. Lining up the second hole, I placed the screw in the hole, but it was crooked. I placed the drill bit tip to the screw, intending to reposition it with the magnetic tip, but instead, I accidentally slapped it back into the vent hole. "Fuck!" I screamed, grabbing another screw. I lined it up carefully, shaking and sweating, and drilled it in. It was crooked and cross-threaded, but it sank. I grabbed the third screw and dropped it in a hole and sunk it into the floor, then stood and backed away from the vent. We both stood on the landing of the stairs and watched the vent. The footsteps continued until they stopped just below the vent, and I could hear breathing from below. "What do we do?" Audrey whispered into my ear. "I don't know. I wanted so bad to see who it was before, but now it's there, I'm terrified." I answered. "Maybe they're friendly?" She suggested. "Yeah, maybe." I blew air out my nose at the joke. Bang! Something slammed against the grate, and it popped up at the corner, missing the screw before slapping back down. Bang! I ran into the room and slid the dresser over the grate, then walked back to the staircase landing with Audrey. The banging against the grate continued for several minutes, then calmed. We stood, watching and listening, our hearts thundering. Then a soft noise came from below the dresser, a crying noise, but not one that sounded normal. It didn't sound human, nor like any animal I had ever heard. It was bizarre, the way it hauntingly reverberated in the empty living room below. I walked over to the dresser and put my hands on it. "Don't," Audrey hissed. I looked up at her. I was scared too, but I had to know more. I pushed the dresser, then looked down. The floor grate was bent out of shape and no longer sat flush with the floor, and the two outer screws had mostly ripped free of their holes. I looked through the holes in the grate, but there was nothing directly below me. I started to circle the hole, trying to see further into the room when I caught a glimpse of something in the corner. It looked like a pile of dirty white rags, but it was heaving, pulsating, breathing. I stepped back and slid the dresser back into place. I didn't know how to fix it or close whatever this hole was, but I didn't have a choice. We just spent all of our savings moving into this house. We had nowhere to go. I knew I needed to find a way. "Should we call the cops?" Audrey asked. "And tell them what?" "There's a hole in our bedroom that leads to a room that doesn't fucking exist." "Oh yeah, and there's a thing in there trying to get out." "Please, stop yelling at me," she cried. "I'm sorry. I just feel like I have to have the answers and I don't know what to say." I replied. "You don't have to. I'm sorry, I'm just scared and don't know what to do." She sobbed. "Me either." I put my arm around her and rubbed her back. We returned to the hotel for another night we couldn't afford. We stayed up on Audrey's phone Googling everything we could about portals and doorways to other worlds, but it was all bullshit mysticism and folk stories. There were no stories or instructions on closing holes in your floors leading to places that shouldn't exist. "What if we burn it?" I suggested. "Burn our house down?" Audrey asked. "Well, it's not our house, is it? If we light the other house on fire and cover the hole, maybe that will do something?" I replied. "It might be able to burn ours too, we don't know." She cautioned. "True, but at this point, I'm wondering if burning the whole thing down isn't the best answer. It'll be hard to accuse US of insurance fraud if the evidence of how the fire started is all in another dimension or something." I explained. "True, but I think the fact we've only lived here less than a week is going to raise a red flag." Audrey postulated. I covered my face with my hands, completely unable to come up with a solution, and began crying. We had finally made it, our house, our place, after all these years, only to have it stolen from us by some unexplainable phenomenon. What kind of sick joke was this universe playing? Anyway, this has been my story. We can't afford another night at the hotel, so tomorrow I'm going to Lowe's, and I'm going to get a bunch of wood, cement, and tools and try to patch up that hole. Hopefully, I will seal away whatever is on the other side. I found a hidden compartment in my new house, filled with thousands of credit cards and one weird notebook. It was a dream come true. I was finally a homeowner. It wasn't a mansion or anything, just a simple 3-bedroom craftsman a few miles north of the Seattle city limits. But it was mine. I got it at an auction, well below market price. Apparently, the previous owner had taken their life in the home, and not only could the state not identify the owner's next of kin, they couldn't even identify the owner. The deed was in a false name, and after some fruitless investigation, the house was put up for auction by the state. Strange circumstances for sure, but I'm not one to look a gift horse in the mouth. There were, of course, plenty of little things to fix up and change around the house. Yesterday's task was simple: get my gaming rig on a wired connection. The cable outlet upstairs was in the master bedroom, and so was the router. I had designated the bedroom next door as my office, and thankfully their closets shared a wall. So all I had to do was drill a tiny little hole in the back of the closet to pass the Ethernet cable through. When I pulled the drill bit out from the back of the master bedroom closet, however, I did not see the mid-afternoon sun I was expecting to shine through. I furrowed my brow for a moment, then concluded the closet door in the office must have just swung shut. But it hadn't. I stood in the office door frame for a while, perplexed, before I walked into the closet and examined the wall where the hole should be. I sat down on the floor and knocked on the wall, listening to the hollow thud my fist made. Of course, there just must be some hollow space between the closets. I sighed and began to stand up to go fetch the drill. As I gently pressed my weight against the wall, however, it moved and I felt the click of some hidden mechanism. I stared at the little gap that appeared for a few seconds, unsure what to make of it. But sure enough, there it was before me, a hidden door. I pulled it open to find bins filled with various pieces of opened mail and neat stacks of credit cards with many different names. Sitting on top of it all, a simple lined notebook. The notebook seemed like it hadn't been used much, and only the first handful of pages were filled with a tight, tidy script. I read and reread those pages 3 times before I put it down. It was utterly bizarre, and if not for the circumstances surrounding my house and the other items I found in that closet, I would have written it off as a flight of fancy. This morning, I couldn't get the story out of my head. So I decided to head down to this coffee shop with the notebook and my laptop and transcribe the story to share it here. Maybe one of you can make heads or tails of it. The story contained quite a few SSNs, which I've redacted just in case they're real. Underscore 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 Loretta Young. I squinted at her sitting on a wrought iron bench in the burning light of another summer day, and then cast a shadow over the dot matrix portrait in the file spread out on my picnic table to get a better look. Sharp high cheekbones, hair pulled into a French braid so blonde there's no mistaking it even in grayscale. I can even pick up the distant look in her eyes and the low-cut collar of her sweater. There's no doubt, there she is. Loretta Young, age 32, social security number XXXXXXXXX, 9012, Quince Lane. The timestamp next to her name gives me a good 15 minutes, so I pour through her file. My thumb runs along the familiar rough edge of the pages as I search through her shopping habits to find what I'm looking for. Her years melt away with her purchasing power, and finally, my eyes catch those familiar italics in between an IKEA couch and a box of Trojan condoms. Lies about crying at movies out of fear of seeming cold to her friends. My stiff new clothes, courtesy of Adam Finch XXXXXXXXX, James Goldberg XXXXXXXXX, and Patrick Fisher XXXXXXXXX, are hot and scratchy in the June heat, and I can feel the first bead of sweat tickling as it slivers down my spine. Having no other reason to wait, I begin my work. Loretta is peeling an orange as I walk quietly towards her. She's not supposed to see me. I was hired to be a phantom, a poltergeist. But I stopped caring years ago, so I took a seat next to her and smiled. "Hi there," I say. She glances nervously up at me and then down at the impossibly thick manila file in my lap before returning her eyes to her orange and replying, "Hello." I know she can feel my eyes on her, and I can see her muscles tense as she considers walking away. Nice day, eh? I ask. Her brows drop a quarter inch and her mouth pulls into a thin white line. I can see the muscles in her legs stiffen and then relax as she decides to tough it out. Yes, I suppose. She rushes a segment of orange into her mouth and chews it slowly to keep her lips and tongue occupied. Her eyes are locked on her file as if some part of her knows what it contains. Working lunch? She asks. Yes, you could say that. Who are you? Tell me who you are in a sentence. Loretta's hand freezes halfway between the orange and her mouth, and she tears her eyes from the file to look into mine. I see my desperation reflected in her jet black pupils. Excuse me? Just humor me, please? She bites her lip and stares at the orange. Hours seem to blow across the grass around us. I need to get back to work. Have a nice lunch. She stuffs the last of the orange into her mouth and clutches her purse to her chest as she stands. The orange peel dangles in her hand and she glances around, looking for the rubbish bin. Please, allow me, Loretta. I pluck the peel from her suddenly stiff hands. Her eyes go wide and she swallows, nearly choking. How do you know my name? But I'm already gone. I stop at the Texaco station on 89th and pull Benjamin Lark XXXXXXXX out of my wallet to provide my fuel. My life before the fat lady seems so detached and indistinct it's not even a memory. When I try to conjure up my childhood, all I can see are Happy Meals and Power Ranger Megazords. File after file, I searched for the italicized sentence, hungry, desperate for some sort of pattern or meaning. Eventually, every swipe of my debit card felt like a handful of dirt thrown on my grave. It wasn't long before I decided that the identities that passed through my hand every day wouldn't be missed. Kyle Warner, XXXXXXXXX, was the first. Beat his neighbor's dog to death as a child. The italics absolved me as I took his name and began opening accounts. Now I have an entire closet at home full of nothing but credit cards and uncashed Social Security checks. Benjamin walks up to the counter and asks for a pack of Lucky Strike filters. They don't make those anymore, bud. The clerk says. He takes a pack of Camels instead, punches his code into the pin pad, and walks out the door. I pull my car out onto the street and turn onto the highway, quietly reciting my litany from the top. Loretta Young, XXXXXXXX, lies about crying at movies out of fear of seeming cold to her friends. Stephen Mercer, XXXXXXXX, gives his family and friends hand-drawn cards every Christmas. Catherine Pook, XXXXXXXX, blushes every time she talks to her cats. Joseph Gates, XXXXXXXX, stole a pair of lacquered Chinese worry balls from his teacher's desk in the 8th grade and gave them as a present to his mother out of guilt. Jack is, as always, sitting at his desk on the Spartan ground floor when I enter the building. The sickly sweet smoke billowing out of his cherry-stained pipe forms a dusky cloud around his head that the dim fluorescent lighting of the windowless office cannot penetrate. I've never once gotten a clear look at his face. I walk across the field of tight barber to his desk and slap the file down in front of him, gently laying the orange peel on top of it. Here it is. Before I can turn around, I feel Jack's cold and wrinkled hand pressed down on top of mine like a vice. Nope. She wants you to take it up to her yourself. I halt, confused by the sudden change in a routine so established it was a ritual. She? The fat lady. The fat lady? Jack's leathery face pushes the cloud front forward, and I cringe involuntarily as he yells, "Yes, the fat lady." Is there a goddamn echo in here? Everyone who worked for her had theories and stories. It was all we talked about in the minutes we spent together every morning waiting for Jack to come down the elevator with our files. But no one had ever actually seen her. That is, besides, we all could only assume, Jack. My heart races as I gather my wits to some degree and point mutely at the elevator. From within his vanilla cloud, Jack simply nods. I take back the file and the peel and walk slowly to the back of the room. The rough beige doors slide closed with a loud clank, and I clutch the file to my chest, wondering which of the 4 floors the fat lady is on, and more importantly, where all the buttons are. I can feel no movement, and there is absolutely nothing around me besides dingy painted steel. What seems like hours pass by before the doors slide loudly open again to reveal an impossibly large room filled with filing cabinets. I step out, immediately noticing the uncomfortably low ceiling. I return to the litany to calm my nerves. Greg Jackson, XXXXXXXX. I halt, unable to remember the important bit. Was it something about his first car? Getting a royal flush at a pai gow table? I take a deep breath and look around. Sickly yellow fluorescence in the stuccoed ceiling light the room, and it is so large and so dim that I cannot see the other 3 walls. Thousands, millions of beige 5-drawer filing cabinets form row after row, like Titan's ribs thrusting up from the floor. Directly ahead of me is a ladder leading up into a hole in the ceiling that pours forth a bright, clean light. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. My breath and heart slow, and I do my best to assess my situation. Almost immediately, I recognize the opportunity before me and set the file and the peel down on the floor. I walk to the nearest cabinet and pull open the 3rd drawer. Michael Straven, Lewis Harth, Alan Riker. I close my eyes and accept defeat. The files seem to be random, and there's no way I could find mine before Jack comes looking for me. I laugh to myself, suddenly realizing there was probably no way I could find myself if I spent the rest of my life in this room. I gather Loretta's file and peel, walking calmly to the ladder. Placing the peel in my pocket and straining my jaw to hold the file between my teeth, I begin to climb. My muscles are on fire by the time the light above draws near, and I climb blinking and half-blind into the fat lady's office. I see her hand thrust in front of me from my right, its thick fingers curled along the edges of the pale white pillow of her palm. Understanding, I fish the peel out of my pocket and gently lay it down into her grasp. My eyes adjust to the light as she walks to the other end of the room. Her body defies the word enormous, looking alien in its proportions. She wears a flowing white dress, embroidered subtly and gracefully, which somehow flatters her ample form. Her wrist is forever lost beneath the joining of hand and forearm, looking almost like independent parts held together and animated by magnetism. She glides across the floor with stunning grace, the subtle movement of the fat under her taut and unblemished skin belying impossible strength. Before I can even open my mouth, she turns and shushes me, the air rushing out of her tiny doll's lips like a hull breach and her steel gray eyes broaching no argument. She comes to a halt in front of a table supporting a strange device settled into a nest of wires. The fat lady lifts the smoked plastic lid of the device and places Loretta's orange peel onto a shiny metal disc in the center of the contraption. Closing the lid, she produces a pocket watch from somewhere on her person and stares fixedly at its ticking hands. I can't help but hold my breath until finally, her finger strikes a button to the left of the device, and she leans her head back and closes her eyes in apparent ecstasy. A tone begins to swell out from unseen speakers, joined by another and another. The chord layers to an impossible complexity. Tears are welling in my eyes as the crescendoing wave of sound shakes my bones and overpowers the beat of my heart. I think I can hear a soft voice, layered upon itself ad infinitum, a lifetime compressed into a single note. The fat lady's breast trembles and swells impossibly as she drinks the sound in. And then suddenly it stops, leaving only the echo of a scream ringing in my ears. The fat lady smiles and softly exhales, opening her eyes. Sated, she walks to the other side of the room and delicately pulls a small platinum disc from a complicated turntable, slips it into a dust jacket, labels it, and places it on one of the shelves lining the walls of her office. I talk to her, to Loretta. I blurt out without thinking. The fat lady glides to the mahogany desk and sits down in her massive, plush chair before locking me in her eyes. I know, it's been accounted for. And others, for years, I add, unable to stop. Yes, them too. She smiles. How long have you worked here? I don't know. I stammer. You have a question, don't you? Something you want to know? Her doll's mouth tightens to a point. What happened to her, to Loretta? The fat lady laughs. You already know that. I do, I admit to myself. Be a dear and put that back for me, would you? She gestures at Loretta's file and pulls a large ledger from one of her desk's drawers. In the cabinet to the left of the latter. They're sorted by date. Her eyes narrow and a smirk dances across the corner of her lip. Then she lifts a pen from the desk and begins scribbling in the ledger, calling the audience to a close. Slowly, I turn myself away from her and descend the ladder. I open one of the cabinet's drawers at random and begin thumbing through the files comparing dates. I find Loretta's place, and then there it is, printed on a folder thinner than most in a neat courier font. My name. Loretta's folder falls to the floor, and I rip my file from its place. I don't even have to sort through the pages, the italics are right there at the top of the list. Vanilla smoke stings my wide eyes and a hard, wrinkled hand plucks the file from my numb fingers. I turn around, but he's already gone. I close my eyes and find the words burned into the blackness. Desperately wishes he was something more than he is. ______, I rush blindly down the street to the pawn shop and Kellen Walker, XXXXXXXX, buys a 9mm Luger. I get into the car and speed home, hoping I'm not late for my appointment with the fat lady. ________________________ So that's it. I'm not sure what it means. And it's probably just a story some malaise-stricken identity thief cooked up before he decided to blow his brains out. But I figured it belonged here. It's funny, halfway through transcribing this, someone sat down at the table next to me and started flipping through a thick manila folder, LOL. If I were the paranoid type, they're gone. They were there a second ago, and then I looked back at the laptop for just a moment, and when I looked back they were gone. Jesus, look at me. Jumping at my own shadow. Except, the notebook is gone too. What's going to happen to me?